Hello and welcome back, Dawn R. Ward, to the show, Unabashed You. So happy to have you back with us today, Dawn.
Thank you so much for having me back. I was just, thinking about what a delight it was to be here with you the first time.
Oh, and this won't be the last either. We'll keep the conversations coming. It's such a joy and a privilege, I feel like, to have this time with each guest, really just be able to stop whatever else is going on and have the conversation. So let's get to know you a little bit more. Dawn, tell me a show that you're watching right now that you're enjoying.
Okay, so I was thinking about this because normally we're pretty good about having, a variety of shows. But for what
Okay.
it seems like a lot of the shows are off of the streaming service that we have. And so we've been watching a lot of America's Got Talent. And relationship with America's Got Talent. I love the talent, and I love to see these young kids coming up and people who've been in it for a long time or those who never were discovered. I love to see their variety of talent. But the hate side of it is the hosts. They all just drive me crazy. And I think they're really genuinely good people, but they yell all the time.
Oh.
Always yelling and cheering. And I'm sure they have to do it over the crowd. So the one side of it is like, I just wish they'd tone it down a little. But on the other side, the show is a lot of fun to watch. So that's what I've been watching lately.
Okay, that's fun. And you're right. A lot of people don't necessarily hit it big or what have you, and yet they have all this talent. It always is almost a mystery in some ways how some people end up, quote unquote, making it and others do not, because it's not necessarily just the talent piece.
It's not. I think it's so much timing and whose paths cross each other, and it's all of that. And so it is really neat to see some of the ones that are older, like in their 50s and 60s. And
Yay. Yeah.
cool, and they turn them in. They say, go on America's Got Talent, and they get discovered. So it's a
Oh,
lot.
that's very fun. All right. How about a crush you had growing up, Dawn? Who's your crush?
Okay, so when I was a young kid, like 8, 9, 10 years old, I think the same one a lot of them had, which was Keith Partridge, David Cassidy. And I liked they sang because I always wanted to be a singer. And so I thought that was, he was kind of a cool guy. But I actually in high school had a crush on a boy in high school. And I true crush. Like I'd never had like a crush on a real person before. And and there was a short period in there when he showed an interest in me, and we dated for like all of 2 weeks. But really, he had his eyes on his ex-girlfriend. So as soon as she came back around, that ended that. And then he fell from, grace with me because he broke up with me over his ex-girlfriend. So, but it was a crush that I had for probably a good year before we actually had our moment.
Oh, at least you got to have it. And then ultimately he sort of showed you who he was, and he really was much more interested in the other one. So I feel like in a way, in the long run, that helps because it really deflates some of what we work, make it bigger in our heads.
Yes, it really does. And so he fell from grace, and he fell from, like worship status down to he's just a regular guy.
And that's good. That's good. Okay, what is something that you're afraid of? And this can be like irrational, or we can go deep if you want.
Well, I got to really thinking about like what is the one thing that has had like it does have an effect on me and decisions I make. And I would say that I'm claustrophobic to a certain degree. And so I don't like to go into like when people want to go in the taverns and they want to go in caves and they want to go in those things. I'm just not one to want to go and do that. And so same thing, like I can't go into a closed MRI booth. I mean, I really have thought I could, and I've tried to go and do it, and I can't. So now I have to make extra arrangements. As long as it's an open one and I just keep my eyes closed and kind of breathe and everything, I can get through that without having to take like some medication for it or something. But if I were to get stuck on an elevator, like if it were to act at all like it wasn't behaving itself and I was going to get stuck on it, I would go through the ceiling, I mean, I wouldn't lose my cool in front of people. Not to say I haven't lost my cool before, but as I've gotten older, I've kind of learned to manage that, but I'm managing it. It hasn't gone away.
Right. I know, and I can relate to that. I really can. The managing it, and as we get older, I mean, and I have struggled with anxiety and panic off and on for many, many years. And yeah, you do learn to manage it, and then you know that there are certain triggers, and you're able to assess sort of the risk factor. Okay, this is a safe risk. I can do this. I think it's going to be okay. And if it starts to not be okay, you sort of know what to do and what works for you.
Yeah, so I don't feel like I have any per se life controlling fears that would keep me from actually doing something, but there have been times that I've tried to just go and do it without giving it thought, like, oh, you know what, I don't want to have to take any medication, I don't want to have to get a ride, I don't want to have to drive across town to go to this other machine. And I've gone and then I've tried to do it, and then I was like, oh boy, and that was really hard. And or if they clamp something down over my head, you know, that kind of a thing, and I'm like, I can't do that, and they'll have to adjust and put something that's just like around a certain part of my face, and I look up and over.
Right.
And so I'm like, gosh, this really does affect my life, but it doesn't control my life.
Oh, yeah, that's a really good distinction, effect versus control. I like that. Oh, really, really good. And I also like that you know yourself. So, and you accept that about you, which I think also as we get older, we learn the parts of us that maybe aren't as strong as some other parts. We are like, okay, well, I know this about me. Doesn't mean it's bad or wrong or shameful. It's just this is me. And I now know the hard nose and then the things that I can navigate.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I think that that helps with as we get older and we can start to really put things in perspective.
Absolutely. Dom, what's a random fact most people would not know about you?
Well, I was thinking about that because I'm pretty much an open book. And so, you know, like I don't know what most people don't know about me. But I realized I have this habit that I've had since I was a little girl. And when I first meet someone for the very first time and I introduce myself, I spell my name. So I say, my name is Dawn, D-A-W-N. And when I was younger, my last name was Constantine. I would say my name is Dawn, D-A-W-N, Constantine, C-O-N-S-T-A-N-T-I-N-E. And so it's funny because so many people teased me because Donny Osmond was popular back when I was a girl, and they would
Gosh.
Dawn, D-O-N, and the name was just gaining in popularity. So a lot of people did not know how to spell the name. And it's still an ongoing issue with people who languages and their second English is their second language. And I'll still get a coffee cup, you know, at Starbucks with D-O-N on it. And so I didn't like the name Dawn, D-O-N, but I'm growing to like Dawn, my middle name. I mean, my first name, because my middle name's Renee. So my mother would say Dawn Renee, and then people would know I was a girl. But it was funny how I just always, it seemed like if I didn't spell it for them, they spelled it incorrectly. And so it's just kind of a random thing that I do that I don't even realize I'm doing anymore. And it seems to work.
Well, and that's so interesting that you somewhere in your brain you decided to do that to make it easier for the other person to understand I'm a girl. It's not D-O-N, it's the feminine D-A-W-N.
Yeah, because they always called me Donnie and I didn't like it. You know, I didn't like being called Donnie. I wanted to be called Dawn was hard enough for me because it felt like a masculine name growing up. It does,
Right.
a lot of people are very familiar with the name and you know, it's more popular and for the most part people know how to spell it. But I still run into people who don't and so I need to correct them, but
Oh my gosh. Well, I think that's really neat. And then it's very clear. It's very clear.
it's
And
just
I also have the same middle name as you, Renee. Did your mom spell Renee?
mine's R-A-N-A-E.
Ranae? I've never met anybody who spelled it that way, and I'm close, Renae.
That's pretty. Yes, that's very pretty too. My mother actually had it legally changed on my birth certificate when I was 16 because she was frustrated because the nurse didn't spell it the way she wanted to on the birth certificate. She just, you know, was probably in a hurry and didn't get it. So when the birth certificate came, it came incorrect. And my mother just kept saying, I have to get that done. I have to get that done. So when I needed the birth certificate for my driver's license, and I pulled it out and I, you know, knew how I spelled my name. I said, Mom, we have to fix this so that it'll be right on my driver's license. So that's when we finally got it done.
Oh gosh. Wow. Well, some projects just take a while to complete, right? Okay. What advice I think, I mean, I taught fifth grade for years, so I think a lot about that age group, 10, 11. What advice would you give your 10-year-old self?
I would actually tell myself, don't stop dreaming and don't give up on your dreams. Because as you start to get into junior high and high school, you're going to start thinking a lot about career and about like the responsible thing to do. And when I was a kid, my mom and dad always told me, even though my teacher saw a gift for writing and a talent with words and things, my parents always felt that would only be a hobby. And so they really said, don't go to college for it. An English degree, unless you're going to be a teacher, is a waste. And it was just that type of a thing. Well, they were from a small town in the Midwest. My dad had grown up on a farm, and now he was a fireman. And so it was just that type of an environment where they didn't have a lot of education and degrees around them. They might have
Right.
attended or taken some classes, but it just didn't seem like that's what you needed to have a job or have a career. And I took it to heart and, went and honed my clerical skills and just went into that kind of end of things in business and all of that. And so it wasn't until over the last 10 years that love and that desire for writing started to come back out again. And I know people in the writing community, blogging and writing community, who've actually made their living off of it. And that, it is a career and they have made money off of it. And so I look back and I say, if you have a real gift for something and someone can help you kind of process and hone that talent and then help you figure out where it would be best used, even though you're 10 years old, I would say keep working on it because you don't know what's going to happen with it when you're 17 or 18 or in your early 20s. And if and so I know you have that balance between trying to pay the bills and all of that and having a realistic goal and a realistic dream, but just don't give up on them so quickly. Like really make sure that it's something that, that is worth pursuing. And
Right.
another thing is for me just not to take life so seriously. I was a very serious young kid and I wish I'd had more fun. So those two things.
That's good. I like that. Okay, now it's time for our deep dive. And you are our first guest for our grief and gratitude series. So we're gonna just, start our conversation by describe a time of grief for you. Now, I can answer this for you, but that's hardly the point of having a conversation.
Right.
Yes.
I know what you're saying. I was reflecting on like the first grief experience I had was losing my grandpa when I was really little. And I remember him painting by number pictures of Lassie and Rin Tin Tin that I still have. And I was very young when he died, but I remember how I felt with my grandpa. And I remember what it felt like when he was gone. And that went on with my grandma, and then my aunt passed away, who I was very close to, and then my mom died about 6 years ago. So those were deaths. I had experienced, the death and the loss of a person who's no longer with you. And that's a very deep and very final kind of a grief that you have to go through and process. But life also hands us grief, right? And I've come to learn of griefs that come around ambiguous loss, where maybe the person that is still in your life, but they're not in your life the way that you were used to having them in your life, or that you expected to have them in your life. It could be loss through like divorce, where the person is still alive, but they're not part of your life the way they used to be, or perhaps your elderly parent has dementia and they're no longer who they used to be. And so in my case, it was with my son's addiction. And what happened was, especially my oldest son, I've gone through it with both children. My middle child he's been doing really well. It didn't take him as low and we didn't go it through it as long. And so
Mhm,
older son was the one who was second that actually got through pain medication, got addicted to drugs, and
mhm,
ongoing issue with the stomach and had surgery, and all of this came that way. Well, that combined with some undiagnosed mental health issues, I really started to have a lot of ongoing problems with him, problematic with the relationship, problematic in the family, times when he just wasn't coherent, wasn't himself, jail, suicide attempts, things like that went on. And so it was very hard for me when I did have normal relationship with him, when he was doing well or whatever, there was always that feeling of anticipatory grief. Is something going to happen? Is he going to lose his life? Am I going to get another knock on the door? And so in the process of me going through this and talking to other moms who've gone through this, we really realized that we are living in grief. And it's, grief for what could have been, what could go wrong. So the what ifs and the even ifs and all those things that go on in a relationship where you just would like to turn back the hands of time and have a reset with it, and you can't.
Mm-hmm.
That's been a grief that's taken a little bit more because it's an unexpected and a not knowing how to handle it kind of a grief.
Right, and like you say, it's ongoing, which is different from, when someone you love dies. That's very different. And I really appreciate that you talked about ambiguous loss and then also anticipatory grief. So that really takes grief and loss, and there's a specificity to it. And I really like how you described and explained it, in that it's different, and there's not just one kind of grief. There's lots of kinds of grief. Yeah, there's lots of different kinds of grief. And also the distinction between the what ifs, which we all know about, but the even ifs, I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, the even ifs are really one of those things you have to come to terms with, because they're the worries, they're the fears. And we've talked about fear a little bit earlier, like what is a realistic fear? What's an unrealistic fear? The realistic part of fear in living with addiction is that these really bad things can happen, and we know they do. But the realistic part of it is that we live in a world where bad things happen to good people too. Anything can happen. You can get diagnosis from a doctor. You could get that call that somebody you love was killed in a car accident. And so this grief that tries to consume you in addiction, and this what if, and oh my gosh, you have to get to that place where, if you're going to process your grief, that you almost surrender those even ifs, these things that we control over, and put them in their own compartment, because if not, those are the ones that'll really kind of control you through the whole process.
Yes, that's a fabulous point. You have to surrender it or they will control you, because like you say, there are so many things beyond your control, right?
And this is just one of them.
Right. Oh my goodness. So it sounds like you've learned a lot, and I know you're a woman of faith. And is that part of, or the whole enchilada in how you got through? How'd you get through?
Yeah, I was going to look at this real quick, put my glasses on here because I wrote down I just wrote down something about this. Okay, so there's a scripture in 2 Corinthians 12:9, and it says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest upon me." And what I learned to do was to hold on to that grace, to say that, God, I don't understand what's going on here, and I don't have any control over it. But you're saying that in my weakest point, that your grace is going to be there, and that you're going to strengthen me. You're going to give me the power. And that's kind of what I had to start to hold on to, put my focus on him instead of the problem. Because trust me, when the problem arises, waves of grief come over me. When I get a phone call or a text, sometimes I still get triggered, and I always get triggered. I'm going to be real about that, but it's how do I process it? And I, learning to be thankful in those moments. So often just living that day by day, where you're just practicing gratitude for today was a good day, and I'm grateful for today. Or today we had this bad news, but thank you, God, that you got me through it. Or thank you for putting those people around me that helped me to get through it. And so just always spinning it back to that place of gratitude versus staying stuck in the sadness and in the grief, which is real. And it's like, you're trying to live with kind of both feelings going on at the same time.
Right. And I'm very inspired by your story, how you got through it, the things that you've learned, and the fact that you really want to share this, not be in any way, shape, or form because it's about you, but you represent victory in the sense that you have gone through it. You did learn lots, actually, lots, and some things. You learned lots of things, and you can be an inspiration and a voice and speak into those who are like more in the throes right now than you are. You're a little more removed from the situation.
Right. And I was thinking about the how it would feel to me if someone else's happiness rested 100% on my shoulders and I
Ooh,
everything right so that they could be happy. And I think when it comes to situations like this where we're grieving over some sort of a loss, we have to take back some of that. Well, I can only be responsible for how I'm processing this. So, I can't be responsible for them to change or for because we're talking about people who are still alive that are, that we're grieving over or
all
situations.
right.
I can't hold them responsible to change so I can feel happiness and joy again. And so I wouldn't want someone to put that on me. Now, do I have a responsibility in a relationship? Of course I do. We all have responsibility in relationships, but some people don't take their responsibility. They can't take their ownership of their responsibility, and they just won't. And as a result of that, am I going to give them full power and full control over my happiness? Because I wouldn't want someone to put that on me. I would want someone to say, well, my relationship with Dawn lacks in this area, but I have these other people that I really love spending time with, or I like to go do this thing, and I find some happiness in this. And I know that when people that I love that I was close to passed away, they always said, go live your life and go have fun and don't be spending too much time crying over me. And that was consistent with, the people that I love that passed away. They didn't want to know that my grief was overextended. It doesn't mean that we're not grieving, but that we're living and moving and processing it and moving forward in our life. They would want that for us.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, I'm sure you've run across people that, and we've both had loss. We know that. If you live long enough, you're going to have loss. That's just part of the deal. But I'm sure you've met people that you feel like, gosh, it's kind of time to keep moving forward, that your loved one, it's not serving them at all for you to stay stuck in this place.
Right. I fully agree with that. When my mother first passed away, I did join a couple of, loss of moms groups just to kind of see like, what am I supposed to do with this? Because I lost my parent. And but for me, it didn't work because there were just so many that were long time, 10, 15, 20 years. And when I read what they were writing, I thought it had just happened.
Oh,
So for me, it wasn't healthy for me because I knew that my mother would grab me by the nape of the neck and say, Dawn, like focus on the good stuff, be happy about the good times, but I want you to get a move on, girl, and go do the things that you wanted to do with your life. Like I know that she would be so proud that I published a book. Like she's not with me, but I know she would be the one like bragging and calling all of her friends and telling everybody because she would be celebrating with me. So if I'm not celebrating because my mom's not here, then I'm not honoring her, right? And so that's what I find with these relationships that aren't what you want them to be. I've learned one of the best things I can do is even when my son's doing well or he's not doing well, is to treat him with respect and treat him with like he's a responsible adult, treat him like an adult making poor or good decisions, but not like a child. And
mhm.
we do that because we grieve that our kids didn't turn out. And so we kind of hold them into this place of when we could still control them, we had
Right.
that place when they were still little. And in their eyes, that's how we see them instead of seeing, and then we grieve because we're stuck there instead of seeing them as adults making decisions and that have access to help and all of that. And so when my perspective for my son changed, it also really helped me with that process.
Incredible. What have you reached a place where, one, you've been able to trace any good that came from that? I want to hear that from you. And then Are you at a place where you can say you're grateful for having had that experience?
Okay, so I had to be honest, right? I have to like be completely transparent. I wouldn't wish addiction on my worst enemy. I wouldn't wish that any family go through that for any reason. I believe it's something that, we live in a dark world. We live in a world where a lot of people are very evil and are bent on hurting other humans. And there's just a lot of bad things going on out there. And so if I could get rid of all the bad drugs in the world and no one would ever have to have any problems with that, if I could wave a magic wand, I think I would. I don't think I would be one that would sign up and say, oh, no, keep them around. And so that's just me being honest about that. But you can give thanks in a situation versus for a situation.
Ah,
Grateful, in it versus for it. And so I am grateful in it because I feel that I've become a more compassionate, less judgmental. Um, I see a kid walking around and it's like he's my kid or he's my nephew or my niece. And I feel for that other mom. And I don't ask questions like, what did they do to get themselves into this mess? Because I've just learned that it's complicated and people hurt and there's a lot of things that go on that we don't understand. But I've become um, less judgmental, more compassionate. I think these are really good qualities that, having walked through that, in any situation that someone is going through with their children, I'm not one now to throw in advice that, if I haven't walked in their shoes, I'm not one to say anything unless they ask a little bit, like, Dawn, what would you think you would do? And then I'm careful because I realize that, it's such a complicated thing and the parents are hurting and the children are hurting. And so I say the good that came in it and out of the process is the changes, and my faith is stronger and my trust in God is stronger. And so those things are the positives that came out of it.
right. Oh, of course, that's so beautiful. And you can't help but wonder if that isn't some of the purpose. Again, not that we would wish all these hard and bad things on anyone, we would not. And I'm in full agreement with you. And yet there's something magical in a supernatural way about the way God works in these situations. You just like, the ashes and the pain and the angst and the heartbreak, and then to see it, being molded and shaped and turned into something so exquisite and beautiful.
Right.
It defies all of our human logic, and it doesn't seem possible, and yet it is.
And I agree with you. I thought about that when I wrote in the book. I can't remember exactly how I said it, but I said if I had a do-over and I could take all that pain, everything away from my children, but it meant doing it without God, without Jesus, would I do it? Because I know that he's always working in us. He's working the bad things out for good. And he's not making bad things happen, but he's taking these bad situations and working in them for our good. And so I look back and I think, maybe I wouldn't be who I am today if I hadn't gone through some of the things I've gone through. And my sons, seeing them in their maturity and how they're growing closer to God and everything, maybe that wouldn't have happened if everything had gone well and fine for them. And so that's where that's kind of that surrender of he's God, I'm not. And, but I look for those little pearls, and those diamonds in the ashes and everything because they are there.
I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. And the fact, I think, that we're looking for them, and I think that would be advice you would give anybody else who's in the painful situation, is kind of mining for those moments. Let's pause right there. I want to get back to any advice you would give to somebody, but obviously there's reference to the book. I know you've written a book and it's about this. So tell us that, because I think it's so important to share the goodness. And you know what I mean? You just have no idea who might be listening to this, who this is exactly what they need to hear. This is exactly right now what they need to have. So tell us about that, Don.
Well, I never wanted to write a book or have a ministry that was kind of around addiction because I felt like it was such a depressing subject. And it really definitely isn't all that I do. There's so much more in my life, but I'm grateful for that outlet that the Lord has given me and that opportunity for me to share some encouragement with lessons that I've learned. And so one of the things is just, I was so overwhelmed with guilt and shame and everything that when God finally worked me through the process of letting go of all of that and embracing his grace and understanding I didn't have to have all the answers and that he's perfect, I'm not, and just that whole process, out of all of that came a book, and the book's called From Guilt to Grace: Hope and Healing for Christian Moms of Addicted Children. And so the book has some spiritual in there. It has what I've gone through, my breakdown, everything emotionally that I was going through, gets kind of into the spiritual side of things, what the Bible says about it. And then towards the end, we'd really look into our identity, and we look also at some of the practical steps that will help us get through this hard thing, that's a really hard thing that we're going through. And so that was my way of being able to give back and minister to people who are, that I maybe won't ever meet face to face, but they can pick up a book and they can read it and hopefully glean something from it that will help them.
Right. And I like the way that you broke it down. And so it's inspirational, it's encouraging, it's sharing your story. So your willingness to be transparent, vulnerable, authentic, and then also, hey, here are some things that you can do if you find yourself in this place here, like you say, the practical steps. I think that's great.
Yes. And I'm hoping I've got a nice little launch team together, and I've had some beta readers and things, and I think the flow is good. And I think that they feel like the answer, there are some practical answers there, but also I'm not trying to tell anybody how to live their life because their circumstances are completely different. And that's very freeing, for all of us to be able to read a book and then say, well, how does that apply to my life and my relationship, my child?
And you recognize it certainly is not your responsibility to go in and fix any of these other families, yet you've walked it and you can say, well, this is what happened to us. This is what we did. Maybe some of this might work for you. And oh, by the way, we would not have been able to get through this without God.
Yeah. Thank you, Jesus. Absolutely. He's holding me up
Oh,
every single day because I still don't ever know. We hear all the time about people who have been sober, they've been clean, they've been free from drugs for many, many, many years, and they go back and they use one time. And because of the danger of the drugs that are out there on the street now, that phone call comes that mother never wants to receive. And I don't think that there's enough self-help books or anything in the world that will totally prepare you for something like that. You're just going to have to go through it, but hopefully your faith in God will help you to really get through it when the time comes, if should you ever have to go through that. And I pray that no one does.
right. And conversely, I don't understand how people get through it without.
Right. I don't either. I just don't.
Yeah.
Take that crutch any day. Jeez.
Right. Is there any advice you would give to some, I mean, I know it's in the book, but just in a quick little summary nutshell, advice you would give to someone grieving or ways to practice gratitude?
Yeah, I really thought about that. Gratitude is something that gets lost in the mix. When I listen to the moms in my support group online, there's several thousand of them in there. Often it's just one negative feed and post in the feed after another. And you start to see patterns of where, yeah, this is really bad. This isn't good, but we have to have things in life that we're grateful for. And so we have to be intentional about being grateful, whether it's having a gratitude jar where every morning you get up and you just write 3 things you're thankful for. Maybe at bedtime you put a couple in there, or a journal, or even following, like doing Bible studies or doing studies that are about gratitude, so that you're being mindful about thinking about the things that you're blessed with and that you're grateful for. And sometimes I remember writing down, thank you for that furry little dog that I can hug, because when I'm sad, she's always there. It was things like that I was looking at. Thank you for that encouraging phone call I got from a friend today. She didn't even know what she was talking about made my day, but it did. And so it's actually practicing saying thank you for it. Or if you go in public and you're feeling really sad and you're into everything, you're feeling all this pain and this grief, but the teller at the bank is really nice to you, just to say, thank you for being so nice today. It really made my day. That is shifting the wiring in our brain. It's shifting our brains so that they start to think about good things again and start to be able to receive goodness again and joy again. And so gratitude is very healing. I think it's very healing. So if you have lost a loved one, if a relationship has been broken or something, looking back on it, but not looking at all the bad and all the loss, but looking at what you're grateful for as well. So that would be my advice.
Well, and that's great advice. And I would say, and I would imagine you agree, that you don't even have to be in grief to look for and to practice gratitude.
Absolutely. Yes.
And it is very intentional, and like anything, it takes practice.
It does. It does. I didn't grow up in a family where they said thank you very much, and you didn't hear a lot of just gratitude. And so it's been something I've worked on.
Oh, well, this has just been wonderful. So once again, the name of the book, From Guilt to Grace.
Hope and Healing for Christian Moms of Addicted Children.
Okay, Hope and Healing. Okay. Wow. Well, that's incredible. And of course, we're not glad you went through the experience, Dawn, but very grateful that you took that experience. You know, surrendered to his grace, really. You allowed yourself to have that, and you learned so much through the process, and now you want to take that and share that and put out, goodness into the world. I think that's beautiful.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me again. I always enjoy visiting with you.
Same, it won't be your last time, like I said earlier. Thanks, Dawn.